Resident Evil 7 was an incredibly important game for the series. Resident Evil had lost its identity over the previous mainline entries, with 5 and 6 navigating more towards creating an action-heavy experience while shoving horror to the side completely. Step up Resident Evil 7, a game that would feel somewhat familiar, yet also entirely fresh for the series. The survival horror roots had been brought back to the forefront once more, with the creepy atmosphere and intense ammo management utilised as vital pillars in the moment-to-moment gameplay. But a new development was that we would be playing in first person, shuttling us directly into the horrors that the Baker family were to inflict upon us. And this is where we will start with what makes this game so scary. I don't think it's an unpopular opinion to say Resident Evil 7 is the scariest game in the series. It's pure survival horror at its best, and one of the reasons it is so scary is the shift to first person perspective. There's a reason there's hundreds of indie first person horror games, and that's because first person is echelons creepier than third. It's much more immersive, especially in a setting like the Baker household. The dirty, eerie rooms are connected by dense, thin hallways, leading to an uncomfortably claustrophobic feeling during exploration. It lends itself the feeling of being trapped in this house of horrors that Capcom have constructed. The ammo economy is also designed in such a way that you really need to take care of every bullet, because you don't get bucket loads. It's also amplified by the fact that the enemies are incredibly spongy and soak up quite a lot of bullets, but we'll talk more about the moulded later on, although they do provide a lovely segue into the presentation of the setting, as they are disgusting, just like everything else in the Baker house. The colour palette of the house is dark and drab, but this is through degradation. This house is utterly filthy, and it makes you question what kind of people could live in a place like this, which further adds to the characterisation of the Baker family. The Bakers are easily this game's biggest highlight. The opening to this game is downright perfect. You stumble across the house, and upon first viewing, it's very clear that any sane person would turn around and leave. I don't care how much I love Mia, I'm telling you right now, I ain't going in there. Yeah, fuck that. Not a chance. You enter the house, and this feeling is only exasperated. Who the hell lives here? Why aren't they taking care of it? Why is there rotting food in the fridge? Then, when you finally do find Mia, the questions only grow. Why is she calling some strange man daddy? Why does she seem so scared? Why is she doing her best impression of the Ring? Then there's just the most utterly bonkers set of events that your mouth is just wide open for the next 10 minutes as you realise what you've gotten yourself into. Jack is of course the best. He just will not give up. His section of the game is by far the most impressive section of the whole game, as I do feel the quality slowly dips afterwards. He stalks you through the house as you scrounge for key items to progress the story, and he chastises you whilst doing so.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna take you for a ride. No!
Whilst he may be more scripted than it may seem on a first playthrough, that doesn't mean he doesn't still install fear into the player, because he absolutely does. After Jack's section, we move on to Marguerite's section. She really creeped me out, and I don't even think I can really put into words exactly what it was. I was so on edge in the cabin thing that she inhabits. I honestly didn't like any of it, but in a good way. This is a great time to mention how strong the sound design is in this game. The sound that occurs upon being spotted still makes me shiver thinking about it, so I'm not going to spend much time thinking about it, and we're going to move on. I'm also not usually scared of bugs or spiders or that sort of thing, but the bugs in this part of the game made me feel really uncomfortable. The cabin is also substantially smaller than the house, so the tension here is actually elevated in some ways. Lucas's section isn't as strong as the previous two, but it's still pretty cool. It's a Saw-inspired death gauntlet thing where he just tries to trick you into death at every turn. He's such an obnoxiously annoying character with how he goads you on, and it's immensely satisfying to outsmart him and finish this part. There's not really too much to say about this part of the game. It's a cool concept, but it's not as strong as the areas before it. This, however, is where the game takes a complete nosedive in quality. We're about to talk about some negatives about this game now, and the biggest weakness this game has is everything that occurs after the boathouse. You make a decision which does have consequences in this game, but Village chose the only choice that makes any sense for Ethan to make and chose that one as canon. Then you take a boat to an abandoned ship. This is where the game near enough falls apart. I know many people say this, and I'm not trying to follow the crowd, but I really can't stress enough how much I did not enjoy this part of the game. The best parts of the game aren't here anymore. The boat isn't anywhere near as creepy as the Baker residence, and whilst a creepy little girl is always a good way to force a few jump scares perhaps, such a generic horror trope loses its luster when it's relied upon this heavily. The level design is also just intentionally frustrating. Each floor of the boat looks the exact same, and you're constantly bouncing from floor to floor. It's just not fun. The mine was also kind of wasted in my opinion. They could have introduced a new exciting enemy type here, but they didn't. It's just more moulded than usual. Which leads us into the second biggest issue this game has. There's almost zero enemy variety. You run away from the Baker family, you fight them in boss battles, but in between that, you are just fighting moulded. Now, don't get me wrong, the moulded are pretty cool. If they were a base enemy, I would have loved it. The way they stumble around makes it much more difficult to hit them with headshots, which of course deal substantially more damage, but at the risk of missing the target altogether. And you can't afford to miss all that often. But that's it. They're the only enemy in the game, and you can't argue back with some of them look a bit different because they're on 4 legs and they're smaller or whatnot. They're just variants of the same enemy. Resident Evil 2, for example, has zombies, lickers, dogs, the plant things that I can't remember the name of. That's enemy variety. This is lazy. They're honestly the only 2 issues I have with the game though. Horrendous final act and lack of enemy variety. Everything else is pretty much nailed in terms of an all-around horror experience. The story is one of the better ones in the entire series. The story of the Bakers is honestly a pretty sad one, and you do become invested in it all. The use of cassette tapes being used as previews of future areas that also provide hints for you when you get there, whilst also adding backstory to what's occurred before you, is genius. Such a cool addition. This is just a very good horror game, one that I thoroughly enjoyed. I would imagine that you have probably played it at this point, but if you somehow haven't, and you like horror games, or you want to get into Resident Evil, then it is a pretty good game to play. I say go for it. I would say that personally I think Village is a better game, but the 2 are totally different games. They both nailed what they were going for. Resident Evil 7 aimed to bring the series back to survival horror, and it did just that, in terrifying fashion. Seriously, any of you that played this game in VR are insane. Could never be me. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. I hope that you did enjoy it. If you did, then please consider leaving a like, as that would really help me out. And if you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing, because you will then see more. I've made videos on every mainline Resident Evil before this, and I will be making one on Village soon. But for now, that's all. Have a nice day, and goodbye.
Welcome to the family, son.